Did you know that skincare can start in the laundry room? All Free Clear is the #1 laundry detergent brand recommended by dermatologists, allergists, and pediatricians for sensitive skin. All Free Clear is 100% free of dyes and perfumes. It provides an effective clean that's gentle on skin while removing impurities like dirt and body oil without leaving irritating residues. Plus, All Free Clear Liquid is Safer Choice certified by the U.S. EPA. For a clean you can feel good about, all you need is All Free Clear.
They're back. Verizon Small Business Days are here, October 14th to the 20th. Meet with our experts, get one-on-one advice, a free tech check, and special offers, like a free 5G phone when you switch. Don't miss out. Call 1-800-483-4428 or go to verizon.com/smallbusiness. Offer available for select 5G phones. New device payment purchase agreement and select Biz Unlimited plan required. Credit applied over agreement term up to 36 months. Terms apply. Limited time offer.
You can support this podcast at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, doctors want to know if one nurse is responsible for an unusual number of patients dying on their ward, but the VA wants to keep it quiet. We'll review the podcast Witnessed Night Shift. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband, a love of my life, and Bad Monkey fan, Kevin Flynn. Hi, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
Also with us is private investigator, certified pet detective, resident cat lady, Bad Monkey fan, and author of the Piper Green series of cozy mysteries, Laura Bricker. Hi, Laura.
Hey, Rebecca.
And finally, our resident Doubting Thomas, author of the City Trilogy of novels, host of Rip Current, Strange Arrivals, our Patreon Deep Dive Book Club podcast host, and a Bad Monkey contrarian. Hi, Toby.
Hey, I've had some time to think about that, and I still don't like it.
Oh, okay.
Oh, Toby. You know what you're getting for Christmas.
That's right. He's getting an actual monkey.
A monkey in a diaper?
Get ready, Tobes.
All right, so Kevin, this is obviously Thursday's program.
It is.
What's coming up on future editions of Crime Writers On?
Well, on Monday, we're going to be talking about the podcast from Wondery, Criminal Attorney.
Okay.
Then the next week on Monday, we will be talking about the podcast Number One Dad.
Number One Dad.
That's number now. It's number like one of those hash marky things.
Yes.
With the number one.
Yes.
The numeral 1.
Yes.
And then Dad.
Yes. Like one of those mugs?
Yeah, exactly. Like one of those mugs.
Like one of those mugs that no one ever gave you?
Oh, that hurts.
No, I'm just
Is
kidding.
that better
fucking
than
hurts.
World's Greatest Dad?
We have a friend who just married someone named Brad, who you guys know. We call him the world's greatest Brad.
He is the world's greatest Brad.
Yeah.
I like him.
I don't really know a lot of other Brads, to be fair, but he's a pretty good one. All right, so Toby, there's a new episode of Rip Current out, isn't there?
Oh, yeah, there is.
What's it about?
Well, last week was about the Patty Hearst abduction, and then it kind of ended with Sarah Jane Moore coming out of the scene. So Sarah Jane Moore is the second person who tried to kill Gerald Ford. And so this is really about her sort of navigating life as a most likely mentally ill woman, starting in her school days in West Virginia and going through 5 marriages to 4 different men and children who she abandons. And it kind of leads her to San Francisco and then all the craziness that ensues afterwards. She lives this very interesting life even before she gets involved with the Gerald Ford stuff. So that's really what this is about. And I will just say that I'm not really good at plugging stuff, you may have noticed. But if you weren't listening to it because you were sick of Charles Manson stuff and couldn't deal with it anymore, I 100% understand where you're coming from. You can start with episode 6 and just listen to the Sarah Jane Moore story arc.
I would say listen to the Squeaky Fromm episode. I think you could start there if you wanted to, but I think that episode's very interesting.
Well, I mean, you should listen to it all. But if the Squeaky Fromm Charles Manson thing is a turnoff, you can start at episode 6 and just go through with the Sarah Jane Moore story.
Good tip.
I'm trying to be helpful to people as much as possible.
We really appreciate that. We really appreciate you plugging your podcast by telling people to not listen to half of it. That's a really good
No,
strategy.
I didn't say not listen to it. Everybody should listen to the whole thing. But if you're like, I can't deal with Charles Manson, and that's keeping you from listening to the whole thing, so you can just listen to half of the thing that doesn't have Charles Manson. And then maybe you'll go back and listen to it. You don't have to listen to them all in order.
Yes.
You can listen to the second half and then go back to the first half.
All right. But maybe that's what people will do, thanks to your tip.
Do you want me to just keep talking randomly about this stuff?
I think we're good.
No, we think you're done. Okay.
All right. So, Kevin, we have a podcast to review that is a little bit dark. Should we make that turn and start that right now?
Let's do it.
All right. Let's go ahead and drop that first clip. Leading off.
The patient is extremely memorable to me. It's such an improbable death that it has stuck with me all these years. And I had just seen him an hour before, and he was seemingly at a baseline state.
In 1992, relatively stable patients at the Columbia VA Hospital in Missouri were dying on one ward's overnight shift at an alarming rate. A review of the charts showed nurse Richard Williams had been present for most of the code blues, but he denied being responsible for the deaths.
I didn't become a nurse to mercy kill or to determine when someone would die. I just can't believe that people think that I am killing people.
Whistleblowers accused VA administrators of keeping the situation quiet and retaliating against staff who tried to stop it. Even the FBI seemed to slow walk the investigation, leaving grieving families to wonder whether anyone will be held accountable for the deaths of up to 50 ill veterans.
And they just kind of want to forget about it. They don't really want to deal with it. I don't know what they're going to do when you put out the podcast. They're not going to be happy. You know, there's really nothing they can do to me.
In the latest installment of the podcast from Sony Music Entertainment and Campside Media, Witnessed Night Shift reinvestigates the Columbia VA deaths. Who did it? Why did the hospital try to cover them up? Author Jake Adelstein interviews doctors, including his own father, who fought the government to identify one of the most prolific serial killers to roam in a hospital. Spoiler alert, we are going to be talking about plot points from Witness Night Shift. So if you want to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes to hear our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. So, Toby, I think this podcast gets off to a really strong start. We learn, we get the story, but we also learn that Jake does have a strong connection to the story and that his father was one of the whistleblowers and is present in the podcast as well. What did you think about the beginning of this story?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, it sets up this sort of angel of death situation with this nurse who people strongly suspect is killing patients at the VA hospital. And then the initial thing they do is they try and use people's expertise within the hospital to try and sort of solve the case. So they get an epidemiologist to take a look at the statistics involving death and who's on the ward at that particular time. It seems like it probably shouldn't take an actual epidemiologist to figure that out, but that's who they gave it to because he was good with it. I thought it was a really good opening and really interesting. It kind of set up in my mind, it's like, okay, they basically know or have a strong suspicion about who's doing this. So where's the rest of this going? Like we've got a lot more episodes to go. So at that point, you kind of know that it's going to be about what happens in institutions when something messed up has happened within them and how are they going to respond to it. And that's what a lot of the rest of this show is about.
Laura, what did you think about the entrance to the story?
So I think the first episode for me was like really the strongest. The story of this old guy who comes in on the ambulance, Melvin, and they're talking about his story. He's 85. He's coming from a nursing home, but it's not an emergency. He's got like a toe ulcer. And I was initially not thinking, oh, an angel of death, but I'm thinking, oh, and then he dropped dead. Okay, something else is up here.
Someone grabs the crash cart and the AED is pulled out to jumpstart the heart. There might be CPR.
The nurse had started the code blue process, of course, and was at that point, I think, bagging the patient to get air into the lungs.
Having that hook at the beginning, I think back to like when I was a news reporter and we went to different writing workshops and like you're talking about feature writing and they had like this compelling narrative that then would lead into your story. That was really what this was. So I thought it was fascinating. Then combined with, as the episode ends, sort of that hook we get at the end where the host is like, and I know about this because that other doctor was my father. Yes. And you're like, what? So I thought the first episode was just set up really well.
I actually did like the atmosphere, too, of him growing up, going to the VA. I actually related to it. My father was a VA psychologist, ran the psychology department at the Northport, Long Island VA for a good part of my childhood. And I also spent some time wandering the tunnels of that institution.
Oh, really?
Yes. And playing golf on their golf course, which they strangely also had at the VA. Kevin, what do you think about this personal connection that Jake has to the story?
Well, I always enjoy a podcast where a host has some kind kind of personal connection, whether this is a story they covered when they were a journalist years ago, or whether it has to do with their family or whatever. So Jake getting to interview his father as one of the doctors trying to uncover the killer there, it's a good angle. If anything, though, I wish we had heard more of a personal interaction with them, more of a dialogue, because he's, as opposed to turning him into a talking head for this.
He's talking to his dad.
Talking to his dad, right. So if anybody can give a little bit of a back and forth, on occasion we kind of hear somebody off mic throwing something. It would have been great to mic the two of them up and have that part be more of a conversation so he could be present for that. Even if he isn't in any of the other interviews, that was sort of my only critique about the fact that it's his dad. It's like you've got that great resource there. Why don't you use it for all it's worth?
But on his way out, this guy, Dr. Dick, gave the pathologist a truly bizarre homework assignment.
And so he said to me, he was going out of town. He said, there's some rumor that there's some nurse killing people. Would you look into this?
Just your typical water cooler conversation about an alleged killer on the loose in your workplace.
Yeah, I agreed with that, Kevin. And he does start to tell some anecdotes about his dad. Like he talks about like his style of dressing. And then towards the end, he talks about like the dad and his like smoothie obsession with like the bean sprouts or whatever.
Mung sprouts, yes.
Yeah. And I was like, gross. I'm not putting that in my smoothies. But I felt like there was an opportunity there to talk a little bit more about how this affected him and affected the family. And like, what did he know at the time? And like, what was he observing? I just felt like we could have leaned into that a little bit. Not so much that it took us off the story, because there was plenty in this story to go over, but just a little bit more. Because it was like, there was like this big reveal. It's like, and P.S., it's my dad. And then now he's just like a normal person that we're interviewing, right?
So, Toby, what we have here, I think that, there's a couple of different kinds of like angel of death stories, right? There are the people who are working in hospitals and killing, genuinely very ill people who see themselves as sort of like saviors of a kind. That does not appear to be what Richard Williams was about here. He was like odd in many, many ways. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, he appears to get some kind of pleasure or interest or something out of people dying. Like they talk about, there's one family who says while they were grieving the death of whoever it was at the VA hospital, like he was like hanging out to the side, just like checking them out.
Standing between them and the door was a young man. He had pale skin and he was silent. He was Otis's nurse.
And he wouldn't leave the room and give us a minute to say goodbye. And it was my mom, my sister, and I. And he just stood there and watched us.
He goes to a nursing home later and keeps a journal where he keeps very detailed accounts of these deaths that were kind of on his watch. And he makes sort of these morbid remarks to people, which sort of bridge this gap between just really bad taste humor and confession. So he's not on some mission of mercy.
No.
He gets something out of watching people die and has gotten himself into a situation where he can make that happen. So he does.
Yes, with impunity, apparently, because it's like nobody cares or something.
Yeah, he sounds super creepy. Yeah, the way he's hanging around after the patients died. It reminded me a little of like a necrophiliac or death fetishist. Not that he has the sexual attraction to dead bodies, but the whole idea that there's sort of a compulsion or something, fixation on death and the dead. I guess some physician did a profile, not a profiler. They went to another physician, of course. So I'm not clear whether that person had like experience or expertise, but they posited that this pointed to someone who felt small, got power from taking a life. And if the other nurses suspected him before they had all the data points suggesting that people were 10 times more likely to die if he were on the shift, he must have been giving off some real serial killer vibes. Although, it's funny because they said that he just kind of was so nondescript, so plain.
Like a serial killer? I'm telling you, with the way that they describe him physically in that one scene, I'm like, that's exactly how I imagined him. It's just like, he's pasty. He's only 26, but looked a lot older. He had the glasses. He had one
fingernail that was long.
he had the wire rimmed glasses and the thinning hair. And I was like, Dude, you're just literally describing like the serial killer trope. Like,
well, dress for the job you want.
Yeah, it was really wild. So, Laura, we have two whistleblowers here. We have Jake's dad, and then we have the doctor whose first name is Gordon. And we hear that he passed away a couple of years ago. However, there's a tremendous amount of tape of him because while he was dying, his daughter interviewed him about this and interviewed him about his career and life. So what a very fortunate trove of archive to have for this podcast, right?
Yeah, I found myself wondering, like, did our host know that before he started this podcast? And was that part of the piece that made this like, well, we can totally do this because Gordon's daughter has these tapes and like, maybe Gordon wanted these to go out into the world some way, you know? And it was interesting kind of hearing him talking about the process that he was going through, how like he only knew the nurses by like a letter, like nurse A, nurse B, nurse C. And that he was gathering this information for the woman that had charged him with doing this. And basically realizes that this one nurse that we now know as Williams was the same one that the other nurses suspected of that happening. But I think hearing directly from him, along with hearing from the host's father, giving those people a voice after they were shot down so much by the VA who is trying to cover it up, I think it was very powerful.
So at one point, Richard Williams does get accused, sort of in a casual way in a water cooler conversation with a doctor who says, that doctor says to him, like, why do you keep killing my patients? The doctor then later disputes whether or not that was a serious remark or not, but the VA takes it up only because Williams complains about the workplace treatment complaint, not because anyone else is like, oh, maybe he actually is killing people, a thing that we like empirically could know by looking at all this data that Gordon made. And Toby, there is this very strange scene where Jake and also his co-reporter on the series like argue about Williams's reaction to this and whether or not it's what they would do. I found that a little odd.
Regardless of whether I was innocent or not, I think that I would want to come across as calm and pleasant.
Even if you were guilty?
Yes.
If I were wrongly accused of something this horrible, of killing people, I would be furious, I would be angry, and I would be yelling. And I think that is a normal person's reaction.
Yeah, I wish people would just cut that stuff out. You're looking at his reaction to an accusation as being evidence of guilt. And I don't think we talked about it recently, but we certainly talked about it a lot at different times on this podcast. It's like people just react to stuff in different ways. And I don't know how traumatic this guy Williams would have found being accused of being a murderer. Like he may not have given a shit.
His reputation, Toby. His reputation.
Right. I guess his reputation was taking a big hit by being accused of murder. People just react differently in these situations because they don't react the way you do, or you would think that they ought to, isn't an indication of anything other than just sort of their personality under stress. So I found that very frustrating and what I otherwise thought was a pretty smart and well-made podcast. But that kind of stuff just drives me nuts because it is. I mean, you're moving away from evidence and stuff that you can sort of reliably use to determine who's done what, and moving more to this, like, I looked into his eyes and those weren't the eyes of a killer. So I knew he must be, it's that kind of bullshit. And there's no point in having it, especially in something like this, which I think otherwise was really well thought out and well portrayed.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, Toby, in the sense that they either should have done more of this interaction with each other or none of it. Because this is Jake and Shoko Plambeck, who is, the co-producer here. And yeah, either like they should have been more of a, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? As opposed to just this one time, because we have talked about demeanor evidence before, as you say, and it's an interesting thought exercise, but it isn't evidence of a crime, especially when one of you says, well, this shows that you're guilty. Well, is the opposite point that proves that they're innocent, or is the other argument that it doesn't mean anything? They basically are illustrating the problem with that kind of evidence to begin with. Who knows the right way or the wrong way to react to something? I mean, some people might think it's like really great to get a Patreon subscription.
Yes.
At, a very...
And some people might just be blasé about it.
They might be blasé about it.
I don't think they will be.
No, they're like, hey, I enjoy supporting...
We're in the business section, by the way.
That's what that music has been.
I know. But Toby never listens, so I'm just telling him.
Oh, let Toby know.
I needed to be clued in.
Toby's like, are we still talking about the podcast here? What the fuck?
We're talking about our Patreon now. This is the part of the podcast where we do that. Go ahead, Kevin.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, mean, some people are like, hey, I think it's great to support Crime Writers On with a small monthly subscription at patreon.com/partners in crime media.
A high value subscription.
Yeah, sure, because people are like, hey, I could do the leading off level. I get all sorts of exclusive stuff, including the Crime Writers On After Show, Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast, Married with Podcast, The Advice Show, and Rebecca's updates on the Karen Reed trial, The Readathon.
Yes.
Or some people are like, you know what? I think I could stretch a little bit more, just $1 more a month, and I would also get the exclusive podcast, Leave It to Bricker.
Uh-huh.
If you join at the Bricker scale, you get that podcast. By the way, in the latest episode, Laura is talking about the UFO Festival in Exeter.
Yes.
But coming up in the next episode of Leave It to Bricker, Laura just continues her explorations of cryptics and other kinds of subcultures. Cryptids,
yes.
Thank you, yeah.
Yeah, at the Sasquatch Calling Contest and Festival in upstate New York, where I was on the hunt for a Sasquatch. Can't tell you if I found one yet. You'll have to listen.
What does a Sasquatch call even sound like? That's what I'm dying to know.
Well, everybody had their own interpretation, Rebecca. They had a children's calling contest and an adult one, and each one had over 50 contestants. And I interviewed people in line about what they were doing. I'm just going to give you a teaser. I said to one lady, just curious, why are you entering this contest? What propelled you to do this? And she said, because I've heard a Sasquatch behind my house.
Oh.
And I said, oh my goodness, that's terrifying.
In other words, a raccoon.
No, she heard a Sasquatch, Toby. There was also a Sasquatch podcaster, and he had a large stick that he brought to pound on the stage when it was his time, because that's part of the thing is the tree banging. So, yeah, it was quite an experience.
Well, if you want to hear more of that, join us at the Bricker scale level.
I want to hear more of that.
I want to hear more about tree banging.
Yeah, banging a tree. If you'd like to support us at the Let's Do What We Do level, you get episodes of Crime Writers On early and ad-free. And if you join as a deep diver, you get to not only hear Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast, but you get to watch the live broadcast and contribute your thoughts as Toby talks about the latest book. The next recording is going to be on November 6th. The book is called The Sullivanians, and Toby's got a great panel to talk about this true crime book. Who's joining you, Toby?
So we've got two stalwarts, Julia Lowry Henderson, who everybody knows, who is a producer. She's at Wondery now. Janet Varney. And then a woman who I actually interviewed for Strange Arrivals. We had a great conversation. Her name is Sarah Krasnstein. And that'll be her first time on, but she should be great. So it'll be good. It'll be a good panel.
We also have an Amazon storefront where you can see some of our favorite things. Rebecca, if folks were to go to amazon.com/shop/crimewriterson, what Amazon recommendation would you have for them?
I've got a good one this week, Kevin. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
We found out that one of our dogs was not drinking enough water because his pee was very acidic, as it turns out. And I bought on Amazon. I was like, I'll try it. And it is freaking awesome. It's a motion-activated water fountain dog bowl for the dogs. It holds 2 gallons of water. And every time they walk by, a little sensor goes off and it starts like fountaining off the top. And they freaking love it. They drink so much water now, do they not, Kevin?
Yeah, and I got to walk them more often.
Yes, but still, they're drinking a lot of water. Hey,
just be forewarned, people.
Briscoe was very quiet today. He napped with me on the couch all day.
Yeah. And then there's acidic pee. And Toby, what are your listener-inspired Toby Ball's deep cut recommendations?
Well, also for Briscoe, I got him some Canine Hint.
Ooh.
It smells like grass and leaves. There's actually not Canine Hint.
Oh, Canine Hint water?
There's no Canine Hint water.
Oh, damn it.
I know. It's a good idea. I might
really
suggest it to them.
Now I have to scribble out my note because I wrote down K9 Hint.
I'm glad somebody was listening.
Yeah.
There's tuna flavored hint.
The letter K and a 9. So anyway, go ahead. Yeah. What are your recommendations?
I need some feedback on this one. The Barron's 6-gallon rust-proof steel locking lid trash can, 6 gallons, made in the USA. I can't even tell you the last time I saw a steel trash can.
Oh, it's great for in a movie because you got to take the lid off and smash somebody with it,
or you can throw it and.
Oh, you mean a steel one them. like the Oscar the Grouch style trash can?
Yeah. It's
it's only 6 gallons. It's miniature.
Yeah, well, it's a small one. I actually have one that's that size because we used to put little cat litter things in it. I haven't seen an actual honest to God regular size steel trash can in a long time.
Same.
This is
Same.
awesome content, by the way.
Yeah.
And then we also have, we're getting to that time of the season, Dress Up America, a traffic light costume, and safety cone hat.
Nice.
It's hard for me to quite picture your body as a traffic light and you've got a safety cone on your head.
Yeah.
Green light's your nutsack.
Well, this one is for men, ladies. So sorry. And it only comes in one size, which again, trying to wrap my head around it. But that's it.
I think we know what Toby needs to be for Halloween. A traffic light with a cone head.
Is that not a rabbit with huge testicles?
No. Oh, don't. This is a nightmare. That's like a horror movie, Toby.
Yeah, you can put an end to this madness by helping us at shopping first at Amazon.com/shop/Crime Writers On. We earn commissions on qualified purchases.
All right, Kevin, before we wrap up this very, very illuminating business section, do we have any Patreon patron saints of the week this week?
Our Patreon patron saints are Courtney Dobbs and Courtney Delaney. Bless you.
Bless you, Courtney. Are you doing this thing now where you pick two people with the same name every time?
I don't know. Maybe I am.
He sorts
I
it
like
by
that
first
for you.
name and just picks two people.
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you to everybody who supports us on Patreon. If you used to, I'd come back. If you don't, I would try it. And if you're never gonna, we love you anyway because you listen to this stupid podcast. All right, Kevin, does that end the business section?
Thus ends the business section.
Domino's believes a free pizza can make just about anything better. That's why when you order online, they'll give you a delicious free Domino's emergency pizza to use in the future. Like when you're stuck late at the office, traffic was brutal, and someone ate your leftovers. When you can't catch a break, get your free Domino's emergency pizza. Domino's Rewards members can earn a free medium 2-topping pizza for use on a future order. Exclusions apply. For complete details, including how to claim and redeem this offer, visit Domino's.com/emergency pizza.
Imagine a world where your technology helps you rather than hinders you. Together, we can power your tech strategy with one platform and infinite possibilities. At NCR Voyix, we help you build differentiated experiences that make sense for your retail and restaurant businesses. Let's define the future of commerce together. Learn more at ncrvoyix.com. ncrvoyix.com.
So, Kevin, who's our next sponsor right now?
We're sponsored by Quince.
Oh, boy.
So we are kind of officially out of summer. We're into autumn. And now it's time to switch things up, move into a new season. And I think, we got to look right past Halloween. You got to start thinking about Thanksgiving and Christmas and cooler, crisper weather.
Yeah.
And that means you got to get your cashmere sweater from Quince, priced from $50.
Yes.
And Rebecca, have you been keeping them afloat with all of your sweaters you've been buying from Quince?
I've got a couple bookmarked right now, Kevin. Right now, my favorite is this very cute kind of cropped, sort of quasi off the shoulder one. It comes in a color called I think it's called strawberry cream. It also comes in a color called moss. And what's held me back, the only thing that's held me back, because it wasn't the price, was which one to get. I love Quince so much. The quality of their cashmere for the price is incredible.
Well, I was going to say that, if you could just get all of them, maybe you should.
Wow, thanks.
I'm thinking twice about that right now, actually. So, switching seasons is a breeze with Quince's high-quality closet essentials.
Just go to quince.com/crime for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/crime to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/crime.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
All right, so Laura, I work at a news outlet, and many years ago, we covered an angel of death story in your local hospital. I think he was a tech named Kwiatkowski, David Kwiatkowski.
Yeah, David Kwiatkowski.
Yeah. Were you sort of reminded of that story when you're listening to this?
Absolutely. Every time we hear one of these stories where there's somebody that comes in a hospital, and in that case, the case in Exeter, it was like drug diversion, and the person was like diverting drugs, and then everybody got Hep C
from his needle use.
Yeah. So in that situation, like he had been doing this in other places. He just kept moving around the country because he was like a traveling person. And at that point, I was like, geez, like there really should be some sort of a central database or some way to track these people. And as I'm listening to this, I'm hearing like, and then Williams is going to become the director of nursing over at this other place just south of where he had been before. And it was so ridiculous that the VA wrote him a freaking recommendation when he went there.
Yep.
Oh, they're happy to get rid of him.
Anytime I hear something like this, I'm like, okay, so not that I want like so much more oversight, but at the same time, this is a situation where there should be some way to track situations like this so that they just don't keep passing on the angel of death.
Institutional cover-ups are really something. And if you think about this one, it's really the perfect storm for institutional cover-ups.
Yeah.
First of all, it's not uncommon for people to write recommendations for really bad employees because they want to get rid of them and they are afraid of being sued if they somehow bar that person from being employed in the future. So there's a lot of fear of litigiousness there. And there's also the desire to get rid of the person. Second, hospitals run on stats and like health and safety and like not killing people on purpose would be a stat that they would want to like keep low, right? And then also...
Intentional murders this month?
Exactly.
0.
Right. And then also here we also have...
It's been 8 weeks since our last murder.
That's right. We also have the government here and a bureaucracy and the VA, which is always the subject of a lot of like careful scrutiny. And it comes, I mean, if you fuck up at the VA, you got to testify in front of Congress, right? It's not like Exeter Hospital where, you know, that they had to deal with the state attorney general and like that was that, right? So yeah, I mean, the institutional like perfect storm here is pretty incredible. So much so that the FBI, which is called to investigate this in the Department of Justice, sort of ends up becoming the like, they sort of switch sides. Like the government ends up becoming, you know, because it's defending itself, like they're using arms of the government in its own defense instead of using them to enforce the law, which is obviously what should be happening. So Toby, what do you think about that? Because the institutional stuff here just definitely strikes me as singular.
Well, it reminded me a little bit of the anthrax stuff that we heard about before. It's like slightly different in that they were trying to get somebody in that case, but they were trying to find like the bad egg. So that wasn't an indictment of the entire program. And in this case, it seems like they're just trying to bury that this happened at all. Not the least because he should have been caught beforehand, certainly, not been let go on this long. It's interesting in that, like, generally you think about an institution like sort of protecting itself. In this case, it's two sort of associated institutions because they're both part of the federal government and one's protecting the other. But yeah, I mean, I've thought like one of the really kind of affecting parts of all this, and I wish there was more, but there are obvious reasons why there couldn't, is Gordon's paranoia that his phone's being tapped and he's being followed and all this stuff, that the government is, you know, out to get him because of his whistleblowing. You know, it's one of those things to be like, really? But there's a track record there. It's easy to find instances where that has actually happened.
Correct.
Like this case. Yeah.
Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. And in this case, that was actually the case.
Yeah, he probably had seen Silkwood. He knew.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting? The retaliation stuff is just awful. But what's interesting is how Jake's dad responds to it. He's basically like, fuck you guys. Let's go ahead. Let's go. Right. Mm-hmm. But he also, Jake's dad did have great proof of their negligence in his own case. I don't know if you guys picked up on this. I mean, they didn't use it in court, but like if the VA was mad at him for stealing drugs 3 years ago and held on to it for 3 years, does that not prove that they know about things for a long time and don't fucking do anything about it? Right? Yeah. That's I was like, if I was his lawyer, that was my first argument in court.
For $3 worth of sleepaway? Is that what they call it?
Sleepaway, yeah. Which sounds like the world's scariest drug, by the way.
It has a pretty name, though.
Jesus.
Sleepaway.
Sleepaway.
It's just like knowing that like the same drug they used to execute people is just hanging out in a hospital pharmacy and a doctor can just borrow some for euthanizing a dog is actually quite scary. So Kevin, the FBI did have evidence here, right? And they were slow.
Well, yeah. As far as, was the FBI in on it or did they work to protect the VA intentionally? Unfortunately, some of that has to be just a matter of conjecture because unless there's a document saying, okay, we got you covered, you can't really say. But was that not the effect? Yeah, it was. The big problem sort of from the law enforcement thing, whether this is the FBI or local police, these angel of death cases are very much like drug diversion cases where it's really hard to get a conviction without a confession.
That's right. Because statistics are not evidence. They're just statistics.
Not evidence. And even if they find a drug in the system, it's like, well, all these different people are there. And sometimes it's hard to prove that, like, well, it wasn't incompetence or whatever. So if it weren't for the fact that the FBI says that it didn't test these samples for 4 years, I might be inclined to say, well, maybe this was a strategy and they're biding their time because they're working on something to go get the guy.
Yeah.
But whether it was not, it basically delayed any kind of justice that people would have, received. It's hard to say whether or not, like, the FBI was, like, working out of incompetence or malice or whatever, but it may as well have been, hand in hand with the VA. Now, you're right. The VA, like, apparently there's no whistleblower protection for whistleblowers here, and they will fucking go ham to make sure that you pay. And they're just sitting around waiting. And, I say, like, Dr. Gordon, I forget his last name, but that he was paranoid. You don't have to be paranoid thinking that they're going to come and silkwood you, Rebecca. It's like they're just waiting for you to make some mistake.
Yes.
So that they can fire you and fire you in a way that's going to damage your future prospects.
Yes.
Because apparently Mr. K or the administrator, what the fuck with this guy? It's like, why do you need to protect this institution so much that you would be willing to, let people die? Like, that's the legacy?
Okay.
Like,
so
as
Kevin,
opposed to we worked and we got somebody and,
look up if you're interested to see if this is happening still. We have a VA here in New Hampshire, in Manchester, New Hampshire, where people were reporting that there were dead flies and other detritus on the floor in the operating rooms and all this stuff, and it went ignored for years. This is an institution that is like, their budgets are very much like in the hands of legislators, right? We've promised veterans this big thing. You will have health care when you get out of the military. And it's completely underfunded and retaliatory and the government protecting itself. It is a perfect fucking storm. But I imagine when this Manchester VA stuff was coming out, I'm like, imagine being a doctor there. This is your job, right? And transitioning from a doctor at the VA to transitioning to a hospital like the Elliott or something and doing this, it's like a very different kind of care. It's not the same as going from one private hospital or big nonprofit hospital to a different big nonprofit hospital, right? And also you might see this as your life's work, your duty, or you feel like you're serving your country by doing it. Like, I always thought about the doctors who like knew about the flies and saw the flies and felt like they couldn't say anything, because there were definitely doctors and nurses and techs in that position there, and it's happening still. And the quality of care at the VA is being cut, and the number of VA hospitals are being cut. And we have a situation here in our state where veterans have to drive 2, 3, 4 hours just for their free medical appointments, which then they have to wait for a really, really long time. This is an institution that's been broken for a long time. So that didn't surprise me.
But it's like you could say if there's uncleanly, unsanitary conditions, like that is on administrators. Right? That is on like the people who are working there for not taking care of that. If somebody in your midst is a serial killer,
that's a little different.
That's not foreseeable. But the idea is like, it's always the doctor. It was the doctors here who are like stepping up saying, look, we need to protect these people. Like, this is wrong. Right? Why is this even a discussion? We need to improve the situation. It's not like later on, you say, oh, well, administrators did a bad job because they didn't catch this angel of death. Instead, they do the worst fucking thing. They say, oh, they told everybody to not cooperate with the FBI and they just, skated along. That's the worst thing to do.
Yeah. And inevitably what you're going to have is a journalist break open the story, like what happened with our VA, which of course was not a serial killer story. But yeah, like Laura, there's a journalism story here too, right? This reporter gets the tip, finds out, reports it out.
Yeah. So Rudy, the reporter, I love his name, by the way, Rudy, the reporter. So like Rudy had been hearing some things that were happening at the hospital. He was kind of looking into it. He wasn't really getting any confirmation of anything. And then he sees a press conference and is like, and gets a statement and notes the statement stated like 3 weeks before. So they were like waiting and sitting on it because they knew this was going to break. But he just keeps on going. And I appreciated listening to how he just kept on going and kept on reporting about it. Because I'm like, he's like a public watchdog. And that's the role of a journalist. In a case like this, he gets the name, Richard Williams. And lo and behold, they're using phone books at that time. So he looks up in the phone book, gets the guy's address, takes a photographer out, talks to Williams, gets a great photo of Williams telling him to fuck off or something. But then he goes and he meets with the whistleblowers because they're afraid that this is going to be buried. that went a long way, having this put in the public eye through the media. And they have really good journalism out there in Missouri. There's like a really good journalism school at the University of Missouri, Mizzou.
Yep.
So hearing how Rudy the reporter went to all these lengths to bring this story out, but then to stay on the story, good for him. But also, it's frustrating that things like this have to be brought out like that they're happening in the first place. Because that, like you said, it's just kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, so Toby, there's also a very interesting scene with Williams. I mean, his wife at one point kind of turns on him for a moment. There seems to be some interesting dynamics there because she's also a hospital employee. I wanted to know more about that. What about you?
Yeah, I did too. I mean, she basically stands up for him, but then there's this moment where, if I'm remembering this right, she calls the cops and he's got a mark on his face. And the idea was that there was some kind of domestic dispute. And one of the cops or somebody says that it was mentioned that she wanted him to turn himself in and confess, and he didn't want to. And that's kind of what led to the dispute. But then, nothing comes of it. I think she backed off and said that wasn't what the case was. But it seems like it kind of hints to something.
She was trying to get him to confess that he'd done it. I presume she thought he'd had.
Up to this point, Melissa had seemed to be on Richard's side. Now she wanted him to fess up to the murders? She seemed to have reached a breaking point and told the officer she was planning to file for divorce the next day.
It seems like something happened, and I don't know if it's something they're going to follow up on, or it's just like one of those weird things that happened and they sort of check it as being something that happened. But that was an interesting little moment.
One thing, Kevin, I wanted to just mention, Michael Baden makes a lot of appearances in a lot of stories, and he's been active for a very long time. And I know he's not like a perfect guy. He's not always like on the, I think any sort of doctor who becomes a media figure is kind of problematic in some ways. But he obviously is the one who worked with the Sandra Birchmore family and was the one who declared her death to not be a suicide, which got that case a lot more attention and scrutiny, which it deserved. But Michael Baden has been around for a long freaking time, has he not?
Oh yeah, I loved the show Autopsy.
I remember we used to watch
Back
it together.
on HBO. Well, this is like a show from the 1990s.
I know,
yeah.
you still watch it, right? Isn't it still? We used to be on demand. I don't know if it still is.
I don't know if I watched it recently, but
and he just sits there talking about how someone died and looking at the camera. It's a little weird if you think about it.
Yeah.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
Hi, my name's Patrick Adams. You may know me as Mike Ross on the TV series Suits.
And I'm Sarah Rafferty, and I play Donna Paulson on Suits.
And we have a podcast called Sidebar, where every week we watch and discuss an episode of the show.
Because here's the thing, neither of us have really watched it.
That's true, at least until now.
So we're going to cover all 9 seasons,
share behind-the-scenes stories,
and talk to our co-stars and friends like Gina Torres and Aaron Korsh.
So look, if you love Suits, amazing. This podcast is for you.
And if you've never watched Suits, also amazing. You can join us and we'll watch it together.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun. You can find Sidebar on the SiriusXM app, Pandora, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow the show so you never miss an episode.
Want to connect with a family member who doesn't speak your language? Then check out the language learning program Rosetta Stone on desktop or as an app. Rosetta Stone is designed to immerse you in the language you're learning through an intuitive process. Plus, the True Accent feature even gives you feedback on your pronunciation. And with a lifetime membership, you have access to all 25 offered languages. Get started today. Visit rosettastone.com/pod50 to get 50% off your lifetime membership now. That's rosettastone.com/pod50 for 50% off.
If your child is struggling in school, then IXL is right for your family. IXL is an online learning program for kids that covers math, language arts, science, and social studies. Backed by research, kids using IXL are scoring higher on tests. It's no wonder it's used in 95% of the top 100 school districts in the U.S. Plus, a month of IXL costs less than an hour of tutoring. Get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when you sign up today at IXL.com/20. Visit IXL.com/20 to get the most effective learning program out there at the best price.
All right, let's do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, should they check out Witnessed Night Shift, a new podcast from Sony and Campside? Laura Bricker, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down for Witnessed Night Shift?
Yeah, thumbs up for Night Shift. I think that this was a story, even though it happened quite a while ago, it still remains relevant because things like this are still happening today. We had a case in our local hospital just, within the last decade. And I think it was really well done in the setup in terms of the host having a personal connection to the story, but also having access to the voices of the people that were involved in what was happening at this hospital when these patients were dying. And I'm not going to give spoilers, but it's good rage-walking material. And then the conclusion made me happy. We didn't get too much into the conclusion in the last episode. But overall, this is something that I'm glad it's out there. It was well done, and I would recommend it.
Toby Ball, thumbs up or thumbs down for Witnessed Night Shift?
Yeah, I like this. It's got a lot of good interviews. I mean, I don't think this is a spoiler, but one of the main players is the father of the reporter. So that's kind of interesting. It's actually the reporter is the guy who was the main character in Tokyo Vice, if anybody has seen that. It was really well put together. I think there's a lot of interesting questions that it kind of looks into. It's things that we've looked at before, but I think not necessarily in quite these circumstances or with quite these organizations at the center of it. I think it's a very well done podcast. So thumbs up.
Overall, I feel the same way. Thumbs up for me for this season of Witnessed Night Shift. Witnessed is an interesting feed because the stories in it are so disparate. They're not thematic. It's just sort of like, it's like the Campside's version of Uncover from the CBC, where it's like, this could be anything. And we put the story here, and it's like sometimes investigative, sometimes medical, sometimes fraudy, sometimes, Devil in the Ditch was like very personal story. It's like kind of all over the place, which that's not a criticism. It's just an interesting observation. And they don't spin them out into a separate feed afterwards either, so they can be a little bit difficult to discover. That being said, that's not important to my review. That's an observation. I really like the series. I thought it was well reported. I thought the personal connection the reporter has to the story is actually very important to making this story more interesting, and it really does. So it really, really serves the story well. So thumbs up for me for Witnessed Night Shift. Kevin?
I'm also a thumbs up, and this is a solid podcast. I'm not recalling any other Angel of Death podcast that we've done recently, but this really drops into the Dr. Death category of crimes. We know that this is a story from 1992, and so I think the listener expectation really isn't that we're going to reinvestigate and find the killer and all that. It's just a story to be retold, and so the strength of the podcast rises and falls on that. Like I said, this is a mild thumbs up for me. I think that there was the opportunity there to do more with the host and his personal connection. I thought there could have been more, which might have elevated this, but as far as, storytelling, this is still pretty well done. So I'm going to tell everybody, thumbs up.
All right, that's going to do it for us. But before we go, Laura Bricker, do we have a cat of the week this week?
So our cat of the week comes to us from our longtime listener, Robert Weber. Robert sent me several messages and was very diligent in getting his cat of the week on my list, and is actually his wife's retired service dog, Apollo. Apollo has been having some neurological issues in his back near his hips. The harness he's wearing has handles so they can help him stand and walk and navigate things like stairs. He had an MRI this month, and since he'll have him under, if surgery is appropriate, he's immediately going to have surgery. They're very worried about Apollo, but they would do anything for him, obviously. So we want to send some thoughts and prayers out to Apollo. He's worked so hard for Robert's wife when she needed him most. Now it's our turn to take care of him. He's very special to us for obvious reasons, but he also has just been an amazing dog to have in our lives. We will go to the ends of the earth to fix this. So Apollo, I really hope you have a successful MRI. You don't need surgery, or if you do, that they can fix you right up.
Well, Robert, I'm thinking of you too. I also have a very old dog who may need a CAT scan in a couple of weeks, and we will also be doing that. That is why we have pet insurance, so you can say yes to things, because dogs are your kids. So thinking about you and Apollo, and really, really sweet that dog was a service dog and now you're taking care of him. That's a wonderful story. Laura Bricker, if folks want to reach out to you and pitch their animals of any kind to be cat of the week, how can they find you online?
They can find me at Laura Bricker on Twitter and Instagram.
Toby Ball, what about you? How can you be found on the internet?
I'm at TobyBallNH on Twitter and TikTok, and at TobyBall603 on the Instagram.
Kevin Flynn, what about you? How can you be found?
I'm at Kevin P. Flynn.
Also, you should follow all the social media from this show and our Law & Order podcast. These are their stories. It's pretty great. Lots of Kevin out there as well. I love it. If you want to follow me anywhere, you can find me at Reb Lavoie. I mostly tweet and Instagram, but I try out the other platforms here and there. Mostly, I encourage you to join our incredible community in our official Crime Writers on Facebook discussion group. It's really, really great. They're great conversations. Get episodes early and ad-free and everything else we make for you behind the paywall at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia. Our theme song was composed and performed by Tyler Gibbons. Our editor is the wonderful Livy Burdett. The executive producer of this program is Kevin Flynn. This show was recorded in Studio C, The Closet, in our New Hampshire basement, where we also have press statements pre-written insisting nothing is wrong. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later. Are you guys ready?
Oh, there's someone yelling outside my office window.
It's me.
Yep, I'm ready.
All right.
It's me saying, are you ready?
I'm ready.
I know you are.
In crime media.
Your word is formaldehyde.
Can you use it in a sentence?
As you're sitting in your basement, you hit your vape, but then your mom walks in, freaks out, and starts listing the toxic chemicals you could be inhaling into your body, like formaldehyde. Which she singles out because it's the same chemical used to preserve your Uncle Rico's funky-smelling taxidermied fox. Formaldehyde. Vaping can expose you to toxic chemicals like formaldehyde. No need to spell it out any more than that. Brought to you by The Real Cost and FDA.